The glass mirror is a medieval invention. An ancient Greek who wanted to see their own face had one option: a polished bronze plate that returned a blurry, yellowish, and imprecise image. If you lived in Athens in the 5th century BC and tried to check whether your teeth were clean before leaving home, you would see a silhouette of yourself, and little more. This small detail opens a window into something much larger. The hygiene standards of ancient Greece were at the same time surprisingly sophisticated in some areas and completely unbearable for anyone used to the modern world in others. The trap most content about this topic falls into is oversimplification at two extremes. Either the Greeks were dirty and primitive, which is false. Archaeology proves the opposite in several aspects, or they were civilized and clean exactly like us, which is also false because the tools, concepts, and solutions they had were radically different from ours. The truth is somewhere in the middle, and it's far more interesting than either extreme. This video is going to walk through 5 aspects of ancient Greek hygiene that will surprise you. Some because they were more advanced than you imagine, and others because they would be absolutely unbearable for a nose, a mouth, or a body used to hot showers, fluoride toothpaste, and toilet paper. Ancient Greece wasn't dirty, it was different. And that difference has a lot to say about what hygiene really is, and what is simply a convention of our own time. Before we start, what do you think would be the hardest aspect of hygiene in ancient Greece to deal with? Comment with bath without modern soap, teeth without a toothbrush, public bathrooms shared without partitions, or the smell of streets without sanitation. At the end of the video, I'll tell you which aspect the Greeks themselves complained about the most, and the answer will surprise you. If you enjoy history told with this level of everyday detail, subscribe now and leave a like. Let's go. Olive oil was the soap of ancient Greece. Not figuratively, it was literally the product applied to the skin to carry out bodily cleaning. The process worked like this. The Greek would rub a generous layer of olive oil over the entire body, leave it for a few minutes so the oil could capture sweat, dirt, and dead skin cells from the surface. And then use a curved bronze instrument called a strigil, a kind of scraping spatula, to remove the oil along with everything it had absorbed. After that, a rinse with water. The system worked. Archaeologists who excavated sites in Olympia and Athens found dozens of strigils, many of them with fine engravings and careful finishing, which indicates that it was a valuable everyday object worthy of artistic work. Some were made of simple bronze, others of silver, signaling that hygiene could also be a display of wealth. The basic model was accessible to most of the free population. Slaves and very poor people probably used the simplest versions, but the instrument itself was widespread. The problem by modern standards wasn't the efficiency of the method, it was the smell. Olive oil left an organic residue that, on very hot days, produced a specific odor that no modern deodorant was available to neutralize. The Greeks used perfumes, extracted from flowers, resins, and spices, to mask residual body odors. Pyxis containers, small terracotta or metal boxes, stored scented ointments that elite men and women applied after bathing. But perfume over olive oil is not the same thing as the absence of odor. The most carefully cleaned ancient Greek smelled in a way that no modern person would recognize as clean. The hygiene was real. The olfactory result was completely different. There was no fluoride toothpaste in ancient Greece. There was no nylon bristle toothbrush. What existed was a set of practices that, for their time, were reasonably functional, and that, when examined by modern dental health standards, reveal why Greek skeletons found at archaeological sites almost universally show accelerated dental wear and the presence of cavities. Oral cleaning was done with aromatic plant sticks from species such as mastic, mastiha, and willow. The tip of the stick was chewed until it became fibrous, creating a kind of primitive plant brush that removed residue from the surface of the teeth through mechanical abrasion. Powdered charcoal, crushed bones, and oyster shell dust were used as additional abrasives, substances that did remove plaque, but also wore down enamel with prolonged use. Rinsing was done with pure wine or wine mixed with vinegar, which actually had antimicrobial properties. Hippocrates recommended a mixture of vinegar, salt, alum to strengthen the gums, a recipe that modern dental health specialists consider chemically reasonable for reducing inflammation. The problem was the diet. Greek bread was made with flour ground on stone mills, and grinding with stone inevitably incorporated mineral particles into the flour. Eating bread every day for decades was equivalent to constantly running fine sand across your teeth. Skeletons of Greek adults from the classical period show occlusal wear, the flattening of the biting surface, that modern dentists associate with severe abrasion accumulated over years. Cavities also appeared, especially in individuals with access to honey and dried fruits. The Greek tooth had a shorter lifespan than the modern tooth protected by fluoride and industrial toothpaste. When Hippocrates wrote about tooth extraction as a medical procedure, he was documenting an everyday reality. Losing teeth was a normal part of aging in that world. The Greek public latrine, the collective bathroom, was an environment that completely eliminated any modern notion of sanitary privacy. It consisted of a series of openings aligned in a slab of stone or marble, positioned over a sloped channel through which running water or waste flowed continuously. Users sat side by side, without partitions, without cubicles, without any separation at all. Talking while relieving oneself was a common and documented practice. Seneca the Younger described the noise of a bathing and latrine environment located beneath his apartment as a mixture of sounds that included conversations, the shouts of vendors, and the general noise of people carrying out bodily functions in complete collective normality. Instead of toilet paper, the Greeks used small pieces of pottery, pessoi, and sea sponges attached to a stick. The sponge was dipped in salt water or vinegar, used, and then made available for the next user. Archaeology has confirmed the use of pessoi at several sites. Ceramic fragments with edges polished by use have been found in latrine contexts in Athens and other cities. The shared sponge may be the aspect of Greek hygiene that most quickly unsettles any modern person. The concept of disposable hygiene simply didn't exist. The sewage systems of Greek cities were more sophisticated than most people imagine. Aristotle documented the need for public urban waste collection services, with disposal at least 2 kilometers beyond the limits of the city. Athens had drainage channels that carried wastewater out of the urban core. But in smaller streets, outside the major civic centers, the reality was different. Organic waste could be thrown out of windows directly into the street, a practice that Athenian legislation itself tried to regulate without complete success. The distance between the sanitary ideal documented by philosophers and the everyday practice of the streets was significant. Halfway through the video, did you keep your original answer? Bath, teeth, bathroom, or smell? After what you've heard so far, which one would you change? Comment again with your current answer. And tell me, which of the 3 topics you've seen so far was the most disturbing by modern standards? Here's the reversal that most videos about this topic never make. In several aspects, the public hygiene infrastructure of ancient Greece was more advanced than that of European cities 1,000 years later. Greek public bathhouses, the Balneaeon, existed in Athens since at least the 5th century BC and were accessible to any citizen for the payment of a small fee. They contained basins of hot water heated by furnaces, spaces for the olive oil and strigil ritual, and rest areas. They were not the monumental complexes that the Romans would later develop, but they were functional facilities used regularly by the public. When Pisistratus and his sons built monumental fountains in Athens in the 6th century BC with jets of water where anyone could take a quick standing bath directly under the flow. It was a kind of public shower, primitive, without temperature control, without a stall, but functional for the purpose of removing sweat and dust from the body while moving through a hot city. The 9-spout fountain, the Aniakrounos, was one of the most frequently used water points in Athens and served simultaneously for domestic supply and for personal hygiene right there on the spot. Athens' water supply system used aqueducts that captured water from springs in the surrounding mountains and distributed it to public fountains across the city. This system, which archaeologists have mapped with increasing precision, guaranteed access to relatively clean water for a population of around 100,000 people, a public health solution that no medieval European city with an equivalent population managed to replicate. The civilization that some call the cradle of the West was also, in terms of public sanitary infrastructure, far more advanced than the historical period that came immediately after it. The collapse of urban public health was not progressive. It was a real regression that accompanied the collapse of the administrative structures capable of maintaining aqueducts and drainage systems in operation. Hippocrates was born around 460 BC and is called the father of medicine for a concrete reason. He was the first to systematically document that diseases had observable natural causes, not exclusively divine or supernatural ones. Or this shift in perspective was one of the most radical in the history of human thought. But Hippocrates didn't know what a bacterium was. He didn't know what a virus was. He had no microscope, no germ theory, and no antibiotics. And that made ancient Greek medicine, as advanced as it was compared to the world around it, a system of care based on clinical observation without access to the real mechanism behind the phenomena it observed. Hippocratic prescriptions for oral hygiene, vinegar, salt, alum, worked because they had real antimicrobial properties. But Hippocrates didn't know about microorganisms. He knew they worked empirically and recommended them based on observed results. The same principle applied to the prescription of regular bathing, balanced diet, and exercise as central elements of health. And the Hippocratic system of health was correct in many of its practical conclusions and completely mistaken in its causal explanations. The four humors theory, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, was the central explanatory model, and treatments based on it included bloodletting, purging, and diets that by today's standards would be contraindicated in many contexts. The Asclepieion, the sanctuary of Asclepius that functioned simultaneously as a hospital, medical school, and ritual healing space, was the institutional health system of classical Greece. More than 400 of them operated across the Greek world in the 5th century BC. They included clean running water, baths, controlled diet, exercise, and the procedure called incubatio, sleeping in the sacred precinct, expecting a vision from the god that would guide the treatment. The combination of real hygienic practices with ritual intervention was not a contradiction. It was the state-of-the-art of medicine at the time, the best any civilization had produced up to that point, with the conceptual tools that existed. If you were transported to Athens in the 5th century BC for a day, what would disturb you the most would not be the absence of toilet paper or the shared sponge, although those two details would certainly cause immediate impact. What would stay with you forever would be the smell of a city of 100,000 people without a complete sewage network, with pack animals in the streets, armed with organic waste discarded in ways that the modern nose is not trained to process. It was the smell every dense city of the pre-modern world had. Not because people didn't care about cleanliness, they did, as this video showed, but because the tools available to manage the olfactory impact of dense urban concentration were radically different from the ones we have today. And here is the point that changes the perspective. The ancient Greeks would experience the same reverse shock if they were transported to the modern world. The smell of hospital disinfectant, industrial bleach, heated plastic, processed fuel, all of this would be completely strange and potentially disturbing to a sensory system used to olive oil, wine, incense, and the Mediterranean breeze. Hygiene is a set of practices relative to the technical context available and the cultural conventions of each era. The ancient Greeks were hygienic by the standards of their time and their resources. What they left us was not only philosophy and architecture. They left the idea, radically new in their time, that the cleanliness of the body was the responsibility of both the individual and the state, not merely a religious prerogative. That idea survived the collapse of the fall of the Western Roman Empire, crossed the Middle Ages in fragments preserved in the Arabic medical texts that saved the works of Hippocrates, and arrived in the Renaissance as the foundation of what would become modern medicine. The strigil disappeared. The principle remained. In the next video, we're going to dive into the ancient Greek diet, what they actually ate day to day, why bread caused so much damage to teeth, how wine was used as medicine, and which Greek food modern nutritionists have been calling a superfood for 20 years without realizing the Greeks already knew it 2,500 years ago. If you don't want to miss it, subscribe and turn on the bell. See you there.